the beginning of Atonement, the ritual, creation through division, a history. Before the system of 2 planets came to be, everything looked different. The world before the catastrophe was quite different. In place of the current arrangement, there existed one enormous disk. The rest functioned similarly, a mountain, a funnel, a river. It was inhabited by the same beings that live there now. On the planet, there were 2 societies which, it is true, lived parallel lives in harmony, but separately. They were divided by the river and the weather. One side was colder, the one where the funnel was. There were 2 seasons there, warm and cold. The other side, however, always had the same climate, warm. The side with the variable climate was dependent on the other, because in the cold season, the entire community had to emigrate to them. Their part would freeze, the river would stop flowing, fall still, but would instead spread out in the mountainous part, giving it even more abundant yields. For half a year they were their guests. They lived there and helped with daily duties. When the water thawed, they returned to their homes. The future was to change the following summer. Before the end of the warm season, a council of elders gathered. They were to discuss a plan that had already been discussed in a smaller group. The plan was accepted only after the 3rd vote unanimously. The plan. Upon the onset of the cold season, as usual, everyone was to move to the neighbors. Everything was to look as always, with one exception. They were never to move out. They planned to stay there forever. What prompted them to do this? It could be called envy, jealousy, or perhaps they didn't want to have it worse. It all boiled down to the climate, which was kind to some, while for others it was burdensome and always forced them to leave their homes. They hoped everything would go smoothly, as if naturally, unnoticed. They would stay and live like their brothers, quietly managing their farms, sowing and harvesting crops. They did not consider that this was not possible over a longer period. One part of the planet was not capable of feeding a society twice as large. That wasn't all, after all. The animals that moved with them to the mountainous part also needed space for themselves, as well as constant access to food. This was the primary error of the upper world. The learning process is not always painless, pleasant, and this was precisely to be their first serious lesson, which was to show how crucial coexistence in balance is for a stable march toward the future. What came of IT? As they decided, so they did. The approaching winter was just around the corner. Preparations for the move were completed. The moving day arrived. As always, they were welcomed with joy. Everything was prepared for their reception, so as to transition smoothly to cooperation in the enlarged group. The next half-year passed quickly, pleasantly, and industriously. The time for return came. A new day dawned. The permanent inhabitants of this part were ready to bid farewell to their guests. However, no one intended to leave. The newcomers pretended not to know what was going on. They began the day as always. After a meal, they went out to the fields and gardens to work. Astonishment was as if written on the faces of the locals. Their representative called a meeting of representatives from both sides right after the midday meal. Then the newcomers declared that they had no intention of returning. They were staying here forever. They could not be convinced, not even by the argument that it was impossible. Nature would not cope with such a large society in the long run. Here on earth it would most likely have ended in violence. Either one side would have been driven out, or they would have killed each other. There, however, violence was unknown. They coexisted for subsequent years. Each passing year grew poorer because, as predicted, nature could not cope. The process of soil depletion progressed and caused increasing dietary poverty for all inhabitants. Crisis. Finally came the time when people began to go hungry. The animal population began to decline. The plan for a long and prosperous life in a warm climate had failed. People began to fall ill, die prematurely. The population decreased by 2/3. At most, 3 years were lacking for the people to die out completely. Another 2 years passed. Only about 10% of the original community of the entire system remained. The newcomers, despite everything, did not want to leave. Perhaps they counted on the others moving out and leaving this part of the planet to them. They understood their mistake, but it was already too late to reverse the civilization's collapse. The day of decision. Finally, the day came that was to decide the planet's future. From the mountain began to emanate a light the color of amber. It was noticed by the inhabitants. No one knew what it meant or what it could bring upon their village. The next day the slow movement of the light was observed. It seemed to descend from the mountain. Slowly it approached. It walked day and night. People began to grow anxious but didn't know what to do. Finally came the time when the light reached the borders of their homesteads. It still moved as if flowing just above the ground toward the central square. There it stopped. It was the size of a basketball. For the next 24 hours it simply hung motionless. People surrounded it, stopped being afraid, because its beauty evoked only a feeling of admiration. They had never seen anything like it. Finally, it began. The orb began to brighten. The light divided into small fragments and slowly began to spread in all directions. From within the light emerged an elder, semi-transparent, shining from within with the same amber light. In one hand he held a long staff, its end split into 3 parts. It was there that the light orb settled. The elder looked ahead, motionless. Suddenly the orb began to emit something like a projection. An image appeared to everyone, depicting the past years, from the moment of the rebellion of the community from across the river, the collapse of their civilization step by step up to the present day. The images vanished. A question was posed, inaudible to the ear. You have led to the extinction of your friends, and still you remain here. Your tribe is on the brink of extinction. Animals are almost gone. What do you fail to see? When will this end? Everyone understood that it was the elder asking, though he did not open his mouth. Slowly he began to turn around. He looked at each person as if awaiting an answer. He heard none. Then he raised the staff high, looked upward, and uttered this sentence: Evil in life will transform this world into silence. Call forth the spirits of the dead to repopulate it. Divide the disk into 2 parts. This change was to divide the civilization as before, but also force it to cooperate. The disks were to be dependent on each other, and this was inscribed on the pyramids, though it was not meant to give an explanation. This was also to be a time of rest for the exhausted earth, not just for the people. It was like pausing a film. Life stopped to find within itself what had been lost. 900 years passed. Continuous adherence to the rules carved on the pyramids allowed the spiritual civilization to survive until the next turning point. In the 900th year after the planet's breaking, the elder guardian of the world began to awaken the inhabitants' memory. He introduced into the consciousness of both orb transmitters a dream. It was the first dream since the transformation. It was a memory of the past, deliberately incomplete, even blurred in details. The aim of this experience was to implant in their memory the past, the reason for their atonement. The next day after awakening, both orb guardians held meetings with their inhabitants. They did this independently, not knowing it had happened to their neighbor as well. At the meeting, they told what they had seen in their dream. The mere appearance of a nighttime dream was something extraordinary. Together, they began to analyze everything that had presented itself the previous night. After a few meetings, someone thought that this story might fit their situation, because the ending of the tale contained in the dream perfectly matched what was happening to them. They discussed the pros and cons, until the moment another breakthrough occurred. More inhabitants began to have nighttime visions. Each of them showed the perspective of the history of the same civilization, seen through the eyes of a different inhabitant. Each dreamer lived through the history of the person whose soul, whose consciousness they were. At the time, they did not yet know this. Everything became clear when everyone, in turn, told their dreams. It was a time of enlightenment. Suddenly their existence was explained. They understood why they were here, why they were in this form. They still had just under 100 years for reflection. The awareness of what they had done in their previous life was painful. To be continued.